Now we're beginning work on your final essay for this course, probably the most challenging. A persuasive essay needs to be at least 1,500 words. It needs to include at least 5 credible sources, including at least 3 that are scholarly sources. We've talked about those for the entire course, and so you should be familiar with what that means. And I am providing this introduction with the knowledge that you will be spending or have already spent or have begun spending the appropriate amount of time on the assigned reading in the textbook, which provides a lot of the guts for what I'm providing you here. So this does not in any way replace doing that additional work. It is really key now. It's always been key, but it's really key now for you to spend the necessary time going through this really good textbook, and on this issue it's particularly good, on how to prepare and write a persuasive essay. So this is intended to be an overview only, an introduction only. We'll talk more about this through Canvas and in the discussion board, but here's your introduction to how to begin working on this assignment. So the first thing you're going to do is think about an issue that you want to take a position on. Don't necessarily go with the first thing that pops in your head. Really think it through, because remember that you're going to be writing an essay about this, and you need to be able to find supporting research and documentation. You need to be able to make a cogent and clear argument. And when I say argument, I don't mean yelling and screaming. I mean calm, clear, persuasive approach to the position you're taking to try to persuade people, and to be able to summarize it beginning with a thesis statement. So think through the topic that you want to choose and take care that you're choosing something that is you can wrap your arms around and that fits the purposes of this assignment. You want to think about not just taking a position, but take a solution-based approach. What solution do you have in mind? Not just who's right and who's wrong, what's right, what's wrong, but what do you think is a solution to this? What should be done about it? Then, before you go any farther, do your initial research. Go out onto the internet or through the CEI portal where you can find scholarly sources, as we've talked about before, and see what's out there. See what kind of research you can find. And if you struggle, that might be telling you that you want to think about maybe another topic, because you want to be able to make a good, solid, evidence-based argument on your paper. So once you've done that, go back and think about your initial thought on what you want to do. Make sure it's appropriate. Maybe hone it a little bit. Maybe you want to recast how you're describing it a little bit, or maybe you want to pick another topic altogether. Then do your hardcore research and find, a good solid 3 or 4 or 5 sources that you can use that qualify as credible sources for this course. Write up an outline, as we've talked about before on your other assignments, to give you a good idea of the approach you're going to take, and then write a draft thesis statement. The reason I always encourage people to write your thesis statement first is it helps you kind of settle and focus on what you are going to be saying in the rest of your paper. And if you struggle writing a thesis statement, again, it might be telling you that either you haven't done the adequate research, or you might need to think about recasting your topic or choosing another one. And then write up your first draft. And this should be, again, a fairly fully researched and complete draft. Don't just scribble something down and submit it for your first draft, because you're not going to get good feedback and you're going to struggle in completing this assignment. Then, based on that feedback, complete your research, whatever that might be, and work on the details of your final draft. Again, as you do that, make sure that you are keeping your textbook close by, and as you're working through the parts of your essay, spend time looking at the textbook, which also includes some sample persuasive essays. They are not written by students in this class, and so they may be a little different than what you're going to write, but they'll give you a good idea of using your thesis statement, of taking your position, of using transitions, and drawing your conclusions. You can use either APA or MLA style for this paper. If you are a nursing student, which a good share of you are, I encourage you to use APA, because that will be used in your nursing classes. And we have spoken with your nursing faculty, and they encourage us to encourage you to learn the APA style. If you're going into something else, you're welcome to use MLA. You're welcome to use either one. Just tell me what you're going to be using so that I know how to identify how to provide you the feedback. Any questions on that process, on selecting a topic, deciding on the format, those kind of things? If you get stumped or if you're not sure, as always, reach out to me. Okay, as I said, this is an introduction, an overview. There is a lot of great information, absolutely necessary information in your textbook. Spend the necessary time going through those chapters and sections to make sure that you are familiar and you're confident as you begin the writing process. I encourage you to not take on big, huge, gigantic, broad issues. This is probably not the place or the assignment to debate abortion or gun rights or climate change, those kinds of things. Get a little deeper into a topic than those broad topics. Make sure, this is something that I often see with students, is they focus on just sort of a meandering argument instead of base your position on good, sound, rational logic and evidence. This is where your sources come in. This is where your use of your credible sources comes in. Find places that provide data and research and help you make your strong argument, and don't just do what you might do over coffee and just have an argument with someone. That's not going to work. It's not going to get you the kind of grade you want, and it's not the purpose of this paper. As you consider the sources that you're going to use as reference material, and I'm using these 3 examples on purpose because I mentioned to avoid these broad topics. Also, avoid relying on sources that have a clear bias. For example, if you were to talk about abortion, which you're not, but let's say you were, Planned Parenthood may not be the best source for you to rely on because they clearly have a position, and so they come at it with a particular bias. If you're going to talk about gun rights, which you're not, but if you were to pick a broad topic like gun rights, the National Rifle Association would not necessarily be a good source for you to use because, again, they come at it with a certain bias. If you're talking about the environment, climate change, which you're not, but just for an example, Greenpeace comes at that with a particular bias. It is usually helpful, so long as you don't get too far into the weeds, to admit to the strongest counter argument or two. In other words, as you do your research, or as you start your paper, you will be aware of arguments against the position you're taking. Acknowledge those and address them. Don't argue 5 or 6 counter arguments and knock them all down. But if there is something that's particularly compelling that you need to address, be sure to do it. Don't pretend it's not there. Finally, in this overview, remember the rhetorical triangle, and I'm going to add one more. So we've already talked about in the prior assignment pathos, logos, and ethos, and using one or more of those approaches in how you address your topic. And if you've forgotten what those mean, go back to my presentation on the prior assignment and review it. And the textbook also talks about these, and see if there's an appropriate place to use pathos to connect with your audience. There's always a need to use ethos to establish your credibility by using the proper sources and making your arguments in a logical but also in an evidence-based way. Logos, of course, rational, good, solid logic. And kairos is essentially, what that means is to be timely. If you're making an argument that was being made 40 years ago about something, it may or may not be relevant today. And so use information and take positions and find evidence that is as timely as possible, and pick issues that are timely. This will make your paper more relevant and more compelling.